she called 911 because I was moving in, but when the cops showed up and saw who I really was, Karen's face went white. The flashing red and blue lights painted the street like a crime scene. I stood on my front porch, arms crossed, watching two cruisers pull up like I'd just robbed the neighborhood bank. Meanwhile, Karen stood a few feet away, arms flailing, voice rising, like she'd spotted a fugitive instead of a guy unloading a couch. "This man is trespassing," she screeched into her phone just moments earlier. "He doesn't belong here." One officer stepped forward, hand near his holster, eyes scanning me like I was a threat. The other walked toward Karen, who was still performing for the handful of curious neighbors peeking from their windows. Then came the twist. Before I could say a word, the cop asked me calmly, "You the new homeowner at 1427 Lakeview?" I nodded, handing him my ID and purchase documents, which were still warm from the printer. Karen's jaw practically hit the pavement. The officer turned toward her and muttered something under his breath, low enough not to embarrass her too soon. But I heard it. "He owns the house, ma'am. You might want to step back." Karen froze, and in that single breath, I knew the balance had shifted. This wasn't just about moving boxes anymore. This was about setting the tone for every Karen on the block who thought her skin tone was a gate pass. And little did she know, I came prepared for all of it. Rewind 3 days. It was a bright Tuesday morning when I first pulled into Lakeview Estates, a neighborhood so perfectly trimmed it looked like the lawns were measured with rulers. The kind of place where Amazon boxes don't stay on porches longer than 10 minutes, where joggers wave politely, and every dog seems to have its own wardrobe. I'd been saving for this home for years. I'm a mechanical engineer, worked defense contracts, kept my head down, paid my taxes. This house was a reward for grit, for 80-hour weeks, and for enduring more than one meeting where I was the only black man in the room. So when I bought it, this beautiful, two-story Craftsman with a wraparound porch and views of the lake, it felt like a win for my whole family. My mom cried when I FaceTimed her from the front yard. But then, Karen. I first met her about 10 minutes after my U-Haul backed into the driveway. She didn't say hello, didn't welcome me to the neighborhood. She squinted at me like I was a bad signal on her Wi-Fi. "You lost?" she asked, arms folded over her tennis club sweatshirt. "Nope," I said, hoisting a box labeled kitchen. She pointed. "That's the Thompson's house." I corrected. "Now it's mine." Her smile was thinner than the paper on the HOA welcome packet she shoved into my chest. "Just so you know, Lakeview has rules," she said. "We like to keep things orderly." That was her word. Orderly. I should have known it was code for something else. The next few hours were normal enough. Well, except for her standing across the street with binoculars. I kid you not. Like she was hosting her own low-budget stakeout. That night, as I sat on the porch with a glass of sweet tea, a white SUV rolled by twice. Real slow. I waved. The driver didn't wave back. Next morning, things got weird. I woke to the sound of shuffling outside. When I stepped out, a note was taped to my mailbox. "Unauthorized moving activity will result in fines. All residents must submit HOA entry permits in advance." It was unsigned, but written in that exact HOA font. You know the one. Comic Sans angry cousin. I ignored it. I wasn't about to play HOA charades with someone pretending to be the sheriff of suburbia. But then came the first fine, slipped under my door in an unmarked envelope. $175. Excessive vehicle noise, potential disturbance. Violation #143B. Excessive noise. I'd backed up a truck and moved a couch. Apparently, that was enough to threaten the fragile fabric of Lakeview. That night, I caught Karen taking a picture of my garage. When I opened the door, she pretended to tie her shoelace on my curb. I watched in silence. Didn't give her what she wanted. The next morning, the trash bins were tipped over. The recycling, perfectly fine when I left it, was scattered across my yard. The HOA sent another notice. Non-compliance with bin containment. $85. That's when I realized. This wasn't just HOA pettiness. This was targeted. And just like that, I found myself in a game I didn't sign up for. Rules made up. Referees missing, and one self-appointed hall monitor named Karen, determined to make me feel like an intruder in my own home. I spoke to a few of the neighbors, mostly nice folks. One of them, Dave, a Vietnam vet with a raspy voice and a sharp sense of humor, leaned in and said, "You're not the first she's messed with, but you might be the first she can't handle." That was the first sign that Karen's rule wasn't as ironclad as she liked to pretend. But the real spark came a day later. I was carrying my sound system into the house, something I'd saved up for during my college days. Karen was on her lawn, watering already green grass, watching me like I was loading illegal goods. Then she pulled out her phone. I saw her mouth the words before I heard them. Yes, there's a man here. I don't think he belongs. By the time the cops arrived, I'd already laid out every piece of ID, every document, every receipt from the closing. But what she didn't expect, was that both officers happened to recognize me. One of them had taken a mechanical design workshop I'd led at the community college. The other? I'd helped his wife get her brakes fixed when she broke down outside my old apartment. They shook my hand, told me to enjoy the neighborhood, and turned back toward Karen with the kind of expression usually reserved for middle school principals dealing with false alarms. One of the officers glanced at her and said, "We'll be filing a false report notice, ma'am. That's a misdemeanor." Karen's cheeks flushed red, then pale, then something in between. And me? I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply nodded. Because that was just the beginning. After the police left, you'd think Karen would have backed off, maybe, reflected on what it means to live in a diverse, inclusive community, like the HOA website claimed in bold letters. Nope. She doubled down. The next morning, I woke up to find my Wi-Fi down. Coincidence, I thought, until I noticed the small green cable running from the utility box had been cleanly clipped. Not chewed, not frayed. Clipped. A call to the service provider confirmed it. Someone had tampered with the line. When the tech came to fix it, Karen stood outside pretending to prune roses that didn't need pruning. She kept staring, eavesdropping, smirking like she knew exactly what had happened. That same afternoon, I received an email from the HOA, or rather, from the Lakeview Neighborhood Integrity Committee, a group I later learned Karen had invented. The email read, "Due to recent activity, we are requesting an emergency board review of your occupancy status." Occupancy status? I own the house. Paid in full. What was there to review? I replied politely, CC'd the actual HOA president, Mr. Flores, a retired Air Force colonel, and reminded them I wasn't subject to any probationary clause. The response? Silence. Until 2 days later, when I returned home from work to find a for sale sign staked in my front lawn. Big red letters. My exact address. I yanked the sign out and stormed across the street to Karen's house. I didn't plan to confront her. I really didn't. But as I stepped onto her porch, the door flew open. "You can't just barge into people's property," she said, arms folded, camera already recording. "You put a fake for sale sign on my lawn," I said, holding it up like evidence in a courtroom. She didn't flinch. "I thought maybe you were squatting. Better safe than sorry." I held her gaze. "Keep this up, and you'll be explaining your version of safe to a judge." She smiled. That cold, regulation smile again, and shut the door in my face. It would have been laughable if it weren't so exhausting. Over the next week, I faced a barrage of violations. $200 fine for unapproved landscaping. I trimmed the hedges. $95 fine for unauthorized flag display. It was a vintage Tuskegee Airman flag, my grandfather's. $150 for noise disturbance. From a grill session with 2 friends on a Sunday afternoon. One night, someone dumped a bag of trash in my driveway. It reeked. Rotten food, diapers, broken glass. When I checked my security camera, the footage had been mysteriously erased. That was when I called in backup. My cousin Malik is a cybersecurity consultant. Quiet, genius-level guy who can build firewalls in his sleep. I told him about the footage wipe, and he just laughed. "She's messing with the wrong family," he said. He set up a new system, cloud-based, encrypted, motion-triggered, and with backup storage in 3 locations. Karen could delete all she wanted. The new cameras would see everything. And they did. 2 nights later, we caught her, or someone from her house, sprinkling fertilizer along my fence line. The wrong kind. The kind that kills grass instead of growing it. Malik enhanced the footage, isolated the figure, and ran it through an AI model to confirm the match. It was Karen's teenage son. Now, I could have taken it to the police right then. I could have pressed charges. But I wanted the takedown to be bigger. Public. I wanted the truth to come out. Not just a crime. So I went back to the HOA board. But this time, I didn't just bring documents. I brought witnesses. Dave, the Vietnam vet, came. So did Rosa, a nurse who said Karen harassed her over suspicious deliveries when she was getting her insulin shipped. Even a white couple, Ben and Stacy, stood up and said they'd seen Karen threaten a mailman for being too familiar with residents. I presented a folder of violations, fake notices, doctored fines, and the video footage. Mr. Flores, the HOA president, flipped through everything without saying a word. Then he looked up and said, "This isn't just harassment. This is a campaign." I nodded. "And it's not just me. It's everyone who doesn't fit her definition of orderly." The board agreed to convene a formal hearing in 7 days. Public. On the record. But that wasn't the end. Karen must have heard. Because 2 days later, I came home to find my garage wide open. The shelves inside ransacked. Tools gone. A hole punched through the drywall. And in black spray paint, across the interior. Go back. My stomach dropped. This wasn't pettiness anymore. This was hate. I called the police. They took photos, made a report, and confirmed it as a hate crime. The detective looked me in the eye and said, "Don't worry. We're going to get her." But I knew that justice on paper wasn't enough. Not for Karen. Not for what she stood for. No, this needed to be handled publicly, legally, and loudly. The hearing couldn't come soon enough. And in the meantime, I prepared. I printed every document, burned every clip onto a drive. I called a local journalist I knew from a college outreach program, someone who believed in stories that mattered. And I sent out one last invitation to every neighbor on the block. Because the time for whispers was over. It was time to flip the script. The night before the HOA hearing, I barely slept. Not from anxiety. No, that part burned off after the garage incident. What I felt now was cold, measured resolve. I didn't want revenge. I wanted exposure. I wanted everyone who had smiled politely while